The advent of nuclear weapons in 1945 ushered in a new era of global tension and the specter of mutually assured destruction. While the demonstration of the power of the nuclear bomb quickly ended the war with Japan, the reverberations of that event has changed everything since. These weapons of mass destruction have cast a dark shadow over humanity. Their presence creates the very real possibility that humanity could end itself in one last, bitter, and utterly stupid conflict. On the other hand, their mere existence has helped prevent open warfare between major world powers for over 7 decades. But what if this ultimate deterrent had never been realized? Let us explore the chilling hypothetical scenario of a world without nuclear weapons. The first topic that must be addressed is the effect not having a nuclear weapon would have had on World War II. Even without the development of nuclear weapons, the United States' industrial might and strategic advantages positioned it to ultimately defeat Imperial Japan in World War II through conventional means. In addition to the nuclear bombs that were dropped, napalm bomb raids had hit several Japanese cities, including Tokyo. These were devastating in their own right and may have been enough on their own to break Japanese spirit. If not, the proposed invasion of the Japanese homeland, Operation Downfall, while costly, would likely have forced an eventual Japanese surrender. The entry of the Soviet Union into the Pacific theater raised fears could have also forced a Japanese surrender to the United States, far before the islands were invaded. There was fear within the Japanese leadership of a communist occupation, where Japan would be forced to submit to a communist system of government. A surrender to the United States, on the other hand, would protect them from a change in government. In this hypothetical world without nuclear weapons, the prolonged tensions of the Cold War risked erupting into an all-out conventional conflict between the US-led NATO allies and the Soviet Union's Warsaw Pact nations. Historically, people have not learned from the death and destruction of wars past, and without a nuclear deterrent, it's unlikely that would have changed. While the Soviet bloc would have held the initial advantage of numerical superiority in ground forces, allowing for rapid territorial gains across Eastern and Central Europe, the response from NATO would have been formidable. The Western allies would aim to leverage their superiority in naval and air power to severely degrade Soviet capabilities. Much of the ground fighting would have likely mirrored the Eastern Front of World War II, with Soviet forces trying to overrun Western Europe through sheer numbers. However, NATO's armored and mechanized divisions backed by air supremacy could potentially grind the Soviet advance to a halt, as they did against the Nazis. The geographic barriers of the Alps, Pyrenees, and English Channel would favor the defensive posture of NATO forces. While unable to directly threaten the Soviet homeland, the Allies could establish formidable lines using these natural obstacles as they received an endless stream of supplies across the Atlantic. While all this was going on in Europe, there could have been multiple subsidiary fronts across the globe as the conflict widened. In Asia, China may have allied with the Soviets, raising the terrifying prospect of a reignited Korean War and conflict across the Pacific theater more reminiscent of World War II's campaigns against Japan. Naval battles could have raged across the high seas. In the Middle East and parts of Africa, the Soviets and their proxies might engage in wars of attrition against Western-backed nations over resources and regional influence. The globe could become a tangled web of interconnected proxy conflicts. Ultimately, such a world war might devolve into a grueling attritional conflict more catastrophic than either world war in terms of lives lost and economic devastation. Without the deterrent of mutually assured destruction, either side would have sufficient motivation to avoid escalating the violence. NATO's advantages in economic productivity and supply lines might prevail over Soviet manpower in the long run. But the toll of grinding urban warfare across multiple continents would make any outright victory appear hopelessly Pyrrhic through a modern lens. The world would be populated by the bombed-out husks of once great cities. The unrestrained horrors that could arise in such a world without nuclear deterrence are sobering to consider. The existence of these ultimate weapons, however terrible, may have prevented the very worst-case scenarios of human self-destruction through conventional warfare. As far as the long-term effects of this war are concerned, it is completely possible that as the prolonged conventional conflict dragged on, it would have drained Soviet resources and exacerbated existing economic vulnerabilities. Dissent and unrest within the Warsaw Pact nations, potentially stoked by Western intelligence efforts, could have further destabilized the Soviet sphere of influence. Ultimately, the USSR's command economy may have proven unsustainable, leading to its fragmentation through internal uprisings, civil conflict, or a negotiated dissolution akin to the events of the early 1990s. This world may not look that much different than our current one. With the Soviet Union dissolved and the horrors of World War III fresher in everyone's minds, the world is set on peace. It's also likely that with technology averted from nuclear power, weapons more akin to napalm could have been popularized. These weapons would not have the horrific destructive capabilities of the atomic bomb, but would undoubtedly create their own horrors. It's also possible that a strong, united, and ultimately decisive Western intervention could have aimed to utterly dismantle the Soviet regime through overwhelming force. Following the relentless attrition of Soviet military capabilities, a direct invasion and occupation of Russian territory might have occurred. This hard power approach carried immense risks of prompting a scorched earth resistance akin to the Eastern Front of World War II. Either path would have likely spelled the end of the Soviet Union as a cohesive power either through implosion or external fragmentation. The human toll and geopolitical upheaval of such a scenario is nearly incalculable. The determining factor for avoiding the nightmarish realities depicted in this hypothetical scenario was the existence of nuclear weapons. While morally complex, their deterrent effect prevented the Cold War from escalating into a direct, unrestrained conflagration.